you won't be here. Okay. So that's which,
I think that is,
4.
yeah.
But he said this is
Yeah. Good, the screen's good.
It's working.
The last time I was here, I couldn't get it to, it would come on and then go off.
Mr. Peace won't be there. If you want to say
So,
Hey, how are you?
or if you change the
I'm doing okay, how are you? Good.
if you make it real,
Mr. Peace won't be here today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that when you're taking care of
I need to give you my schedule for November, December,
signing
August. I think it's August. I'll let you know.
All right.
but
Oh.
somebody who does.
Okay, are we ready? Are we rolling? Eric, are we rolling?
Yes, we are.
All right, it's now 7 p.m. It's time to call this regularly scheduled Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. First item on our agenda tonight is the minutes from our July 16th meeting. You noted that Mr. Pease is absent. Mr. Okafor is here, and we're expecting Mr. Sandler. All right. Any comments or questions on the minutes? Any changes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to, and here's Mr. Sandler, so we're good except for Mr. Pease.
I recommend approval of the minutes.
Second.
Say first and second, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Item number 2 on the agenda. Applicant.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, you good? Daniela Clary, at or about 348 East Trip Road, minor plat, Clary Addition, Phase 2. Mr. Angela?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Commissioners. Applicant's an owner of an unimproved and residentially zoned property located at 348 East Trip Road, right here next to her town park. She's requesting the approval of a minor plat in order to construct a single-family home on the lot. The property resides within a single-family 2 residential zoning district. It's 28.45 acre tract, and it received a variance from the Board of Adjustment this past June from the required minimum lot width standards of the zoning district, which is located currently. The only point of ingress egress is through a narrow frontage from which the property received the variance. Applicant will work with town engineer and fire chief to ensure proper access and utilities for the property are provided. All staff comments will have to be addressed prior to construction of the lot. The details are as follows. The access, as already stated, is a single 25-foot drive located on Trip Road. The setbacks for the property are stated on the plat. It's 80 feet on the front, 50 on the sides, and 120 on the rear. With all this being said, town staff does recommend approval of the minor plat contingent to staff comments. Future access to the property shall meet the requirements of the town engineer and fire chief prior to awarding a building permit. That's all we have. Thank you.
I'm assuming that of course you might not be able to answer this, the adjustment was done simply because of the small spot
Yes.
and no frontage road or frontage. Okay.
That's just the narrow end at the
Okay.
northwest corners or east corners where the frontage is.
These first 3 items we're discussing are action items or discussion action items. We do not have to allow for public hearing, so we won't call for an opening of a public hearing, but if you want to have something to say about this, you may come up and step forward and say, we just don't declare an open meeting or open a public meeting. Anyone wish to address this? Okay. Commissioners? Comments? Looks pretty straightforward. Entertain a motion? I'll be bashful.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the minor plat, excuse me, of the Clary Addition Phase 2 be approved.
Motion by Mr. Lawson and second by Ms. Daniels. All those in favor? Motion passes. Item agenda number 3, another discussion action item. Mr. Angel? Oh, let me think, I guess I should say this. Glacier Estates Lot Venture Limited at or about northeast quadrant of the intersection of Tripp Road and Johnson Road. The request is Spring Lakes Estate Phase 2 for the final plat. Mr. Angel?
Yes, the concept plan was originally approved by Town Council in December 2016. The preliminary plat for Spring Lake Estates, also known as Glacier Estates, was approved in March of 2017. The entire subdivision, Phase 1 and 2, is 50.2 acres in size and is zoned SF3, single family 3. It abuts Sunnyvale Estates to the west, Falls Development to the east, and Town Park property to the south, and the utility property owned by Encore Electric Delivery to the north. The proposed plat is Phase 2 consists of 7 lots totaling 8.65 acres. The lots are located along the southern portion of the subdivision and will be accessed by Virgil Drive. You can see here I've outlined where the Phase 2 will be. The proposal adheres to the approved concept plan and preliminary plan for the development. The development will be constructed under base zoning SF3 with the following setbacks: 70 feet front yard setback, 80 feet rear, 30 on the sides. And it should be also be noted that Lot 1 will be further restricted on the rear setback due to the designated FEMA 100-year floodplain easement. All that being said, all comments have been addressed by the applicant, and staff recommends approval of the final plat.
Okay. Applicant wish to say anything further? Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
I do have a question. With the FEMA restriction, they just can't build on it. Do they have to do anything else on it?
No, they can't build on it. If they'd like to, they can construct a pool, but that's about it. Nothing will be allowed there.
And along that same line, I noticed that that the FEMA will not go through until the final newspaper notification on the, it looks like it's already passed August 9th. Do we know if that's been done or not?
I believe it has been. The town engineer has signed off on it and approved
Okay.
it.
Okay. All right. Entertain a motion?
No, I got a question for the developer on that area. The present subdivision that they have completed, the class, there is a drainage problem on this spot, on the lower end. How are you going to solve it right now if you're going to plant the other end? You know what I'm talking about? At this end, you have some drainage problem right now.
Which end are you talking about? Are you talking about lot 1 in specific?
No, down. Yeah, that side there.
Right, so, do I need to do my name?
Yes, please.
Noah Flaviano with Scoreboard Company, 8214 Westchester, Suite 710, Dallas, Texas 75225. Are you talking about lot 7 right now? The one closest to the big flume?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, we kind of did that working with the city. It's a big hole right now and the dirt's on lot 6.
Yes.
So that will get filled back in and that's going to be a buildable lot. We just kind of did that as like a pseudo detention pond because to hold the silt from going into the city's pond, we tried our best. We just mucked the city's pond probably a month ago. And we've cleaned out all the culverts and everything, and the builders are starting to water inject their lots right now, and that's what might be causing a lot of water, but we're on their case about that, about the erosion and stuff like that. But drainage-wise, there's a big flume right there that goes into the floodplain in the city's property that's it's a drainage easement. It's a big flume that could carry all the water, actually from the north part all the way south. So I don't know which drainage, or if you're talking about that one lot, I understand that because it will be filled back in and it will be a lot and there will be a house on there and then everything should flow correctly into that flume down to the pond.
And also along Jobson, are you the same company owns the first estate?
The what?
Is it the same company that owns the?
Across Jobson?
Yes.
No, different. We worked together with them. That's when Jackson. We worked together on the big drainage channel right at the front of Jobson.
Because along Jobson is not draining well.
On our side?
No,
On the other, I can't say anything about the other side.
It's the same company.
No, it's not. No. We're just the east side of Jobson.
Okay.
We fixed ours.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
All right, entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the Glacier Estates Lot Venture Limited request for the Phase 2 of the final plat Spring Lakes Phase 2.
Second.
First and a second, all those in favor? Passes. All right, on our fourth agenda item, Ms. Mitchell will have to be recused because of a conflict of interest. The applicant is Chris Hagan, Vince Hagan Company, at or about 330 Clay Road. The request is for amended site plan, Vince Hagan lunchroom. Mr. Angel?
Yes, the subject property is 10.23 acres in size and was platted under several different plats. The property butts Kaffenberger Barger Truck Equipment Company in the north, Clay Road to the west, and a small bakery distribution facility and Cyan Road to the south. McElroy Metal lies to the east, as well as a vacant lot of a different owner to the southeast. A portion of the Vince Hagan site was recently approved for construction. Got that highlighted right here. And of an office building on Lot 4 of the Sunnyvale Center number 1 plat. The applicant wishes to amend the site plan to allow for the addition of a lunchroom on the southeast portion of the site, shown on the screen. A request for alternative compliance has also been submitted for the elimination of the masonry requirement, as well as building articulation requirements. The overall design of the plan features a 2,870 square foot, one-story building with 3 public entries on the east and west sides. Access to the site will be provided by a shared access drive within the industrial park. New parking will be limited due to the close proximity of existing parking areas. Plans call for employees to walk from the lunchroom to the main building. The plan details show building height of 12 feet as measured from grade to the eaves. Alternative compliance, as already stated, is being requested to allow for elimination of masonry requirement. The applicant intends to construct the building entirely of metal. Alternative compliance has also been requested to eliminate the articulation requirements. Applicant intends to construct the building with no articulation, vertical or horizontal, with the exception of the gable roof. Off-street parking for the lunchroom is not necessary as stated, since employees can access the site on foot. However, the applicant has chosen to include 6 parking spaces, and the site requires minimal landscaping, which the applicant has provided on the ends of the parking lot. UDO requires that the setbacks for light industrial zoning meet the minimum stated below, which is 40 feet on the front, 25 on the side and rear. The proposed location of the building exceeds those distances. Town staff recommends approval contingent to the following comments. Applicant should submit an overall site plan that depicts the entire Vince Hagan property. The overall plan should show how the proposed lunchroom building fits within the entire site. A request for alternative compliance has been submitted for the elimination of the masonry requirements of building articulation. Staff notes the main building for Vince Hagan is constructed with a metal exterior. The proposed building is accessory to the main structure for Vince Hagan, and the request will allow for design consistency between the 2 structures. The building is also not visible from the right-of-way, so staff recommends approval of these requests.
Okay, I have one question for staff. So in this, we're not only going to amend the site plan, but we're also to approve the alternative compliance for the masonry.
Yes, those are
So we're doing both as a single item instead of,
yes,
sometimes we
masonry.
do them as two separate items, but this time we're doing a single.
In some cases in the past, we have had people come back and request alternative compliance as a separate issue, but since this is all encompassing, we just decided to
Okay.
address it.
Just clarification. Pat, then wish to say anything about the project? So come forward, state your name and address.
The applicants are arriving right now.
Okay.
Mr. Hayden?
Do you wish to say anything about this particular project? It's your turn.
Hi, my name's Chris Hagan. Sorry about coming in tardy. Traffic was awful.
Address for the record, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Chris Hagan, and I live at 2712 Mount View Drive, Farmers Branch. And the proposed, the lunchroom, I guess, what was it that, I was a little confused. What is it that I'm
This
discussing
is
up
the
here?
lunchroom, I think, right?
Just the lunchroom alone.
And this is all just about the lunchroom building by itself.
Okay. We have a proposed lunchroom that we would like to put kind of back in the industrial area, not in visible view from the street, Clay Road. And what we're trying to do is actually have an area for our workers to have lunch, to be able to get out of the heat, to get out of the cold when it's cold, and to just take a break. It's something we really want to do for our employees, and it was something that we thought we were going to be able to do along with the office building. What's kind of come into play is that all the buildings around us are metal, and it seems like there's some new issues that are kind of hindering us being able to put in a building that's affordable. One of them is, the all-metal building, which all the buildings surrounding us are all metal. And the other being the landscaping requirements. And, I look around the property and it doesn't seem like there's really any landscaping to be talked about.
Right.
And we don't mind necessarily putting in landscaping, but the requirements for landscaping seem to be pretty more like a park than landscaping. So that was one of our other concerns. Appreciate it.
Any comments or questions for the applicant? As far as my personal feelings, I think you're in an industrial area, the metal building is just fine, your landscaping is out further away from the building. I see no issue with anything that you presented here. I do have one quick question on the floor plan.
Sure.
There shows to be a retail service counter. What's it going to be used for in the lunchroom?
Oh, what that is that our parts department is in our facility where we keep all the parts. And just for safety reasons, we kind of want to keep the customers. And we don't have a lot of customers. Most of our customers are throughout the country. We have a few local customers, but like I said, most of our customers are throughout the country. And the local customers that we do have that come pick up parts, we don't want them in the manufacturing area. So we thought we would just have a desk there where they could come up and somebody would come and, maybe let the people know in our parts department to bring up the part that they need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that answered that question because I didn't know since it was a lunchroom whether or not there was going to be someone there, selling food service items like sandwiches.
No,
So
absolutely
you're
not.
actually going to use this for parts.
It's really just to keep the local customers
Okay.
safe.
And that's the reason you have a separate interest in separate parking there, I'm assuming.
Correct. Yeah.
Very good. If there is a counter there, it will have to meet ADA, section 904 and 902.3 for
Disability.
30 or 36 inch wide.
Absolutely.
So I didn't notice that on the floor plan. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, sir.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much.
Entertain a motion.
make a motion to approve the amended site plan for Vince Hagen Lunchroom at 330 Clay Road.
Here, second.
I second the motion.
It's been motion and second. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Did somebody get it? Ms. Mitchell? Now, the next thing we have on our agenda is items, and I'm thinking we're covering 5, 6, and 7, all as one item with separate discussion.
We can, I set up the agenda where we can discuss it all at once, because they're pretty much all tied
All
together.
ties together.
But there's separate items that can be approved separately if need be.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read all 3 of these at one time. Actually, yeah, there's more. I'm sorry. The applicant is for the town of Sunnyvale. The request is to change the light industrial zoning district LI name to industrial zoning district I. An ordinance amending the Town Unified Development Ordinance, Ordinance 17-09, duly passed by the Town Council on March 26, 2018, as amended from time to time, so as to amend Section 303.12, light industrial, specifically the zoning district name, as well as Section 303.02, Table 12, and other associated sections within the Unified Development Ordinance. Item 6. Town of Sunnyvale is the applicant. The request is to add a heavy assembly and manufacturing processes land use classification. An ordinance amending the Town Unified Development Ordinance 17-09, duly passed by the Town Council on March 26, 2018, as amended from time to time so as to review and amend Section 3.04 zoning land use regulations, specifically Section 3.04.03 use chart, as well as other associated sections. Item 7, add non-residential development industrial exterior material standards. An ordinance amending the Town Unified Development Ordinance 17-09, duly passed by the Town Council on March 26, 2018, as amended from time to time so as to amend Section 3.06.02.d.2, non-residential development, as well as other associated sections. Item 8, add industrial alternative landscape compliance exception by adding specific alternative landscape compliance for residential and non-residential development. An ordinance amending the Town Unified Development Ordinance, Ordinance 17-09, duly passed by the Town Council on March 26, 2018, as amended from time to time, so as to amend Section 3.06.02 landscape requirements, as well as other associated sections.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat this?
You get the first time. I'm not done the second. Mr. Jackson.
Chairman Dipko, Commission. I find it fitting that Vince Hagen application just was approved. And you guys know that some of those variations that were requested are some of the situations that we're dealing with development in the industrial park. And these amendments are intended to address those issues. And provide a background, the town adopted a comprehensive plan in February 2017. With that comprehensive plan, intentions were noted that development in the industrial park was intended to go towards more of a business park approach. And that was, I don't know if it was something that should have revised the ordinance the way it did, but at the same time, there were some concerns with the industrial that abutted residential, so this was the way that they were addressing it. Some of the changes that were made were the change to the industrial district zoning name to emphasize the intent for light industrial. They changed the district to light industrial, even though there are heavy manufacturing uses in that district. There were some concerns with the residents, not the residents, but the business owners. With regard to marketing for that area now that is noted as light industrial, we get as staff questions of whether or not heavy manufacturing can happen in the light industrial district. So we felt it was best to make an amendment to bring the district name back to industrial, and then just provide a land use classification for heavy manufacturing as we had in the previous ordinance. And speaking of that, the general land use classification, heavy manufacturing was also removed in the UDO. We had a light industrial, light manufacturing in the old ordinance and a heavy manufacturing in the old ordinance. Staff proposes to bring that back. The change that was made in order to allow for some of the existing uses to remain, like the tile manufacturer and the concrete batch plants that we have down there, they were given a specific land use classification in the land use chart, rather than having a heavy manufacturing, a general title. The issue is when those uses leave, what heavy manufacturing use can come in after that. So as staff, we felt that it was necessary, and town council directed staff to make these changes to bring forth a amendment to add heavy manufacturing back into the UDO as a classification. As well, the exterior building materials, case in point, the site plan that was recently approved. The old ordinance allowed for metal exteriors outside of 300 feet from the right-of-way. The new ordinance treats industrial development just like any other non-residential development, and it probably shouldn't be done that way. It was more so a change to streamline the ordinance, and it just had a bad effect. So staff was asked to create an amendment to bring that caveat back, but make it 200 instead of 300. I feel as though most of the lots along Clay, and we're talking Clay here, and maybe Aston Drive, that truly front the right-of-way are within 200 feet. Once you get to 300, you're actually in the industrial park, and it doesn't make sense for those buildings to be required to have a masonry exterior, that far off the right-of-way. So some of the amendments, you can still, in that 200 feet, the amendment I've proposed still allows for alternative compliance. If you're still required to have that front facade brick and you're within 200 feet, you can still propose what you would like. We still want the developer to be able to propose what they would like, but there's still a standard we need to uphold. But we don't want to prevent the idea for them to, or the opportunity for them to propose an alternative. Same can be said for the landscaping. In the transition from the old ordinance to the new, the landscaping, many requirements that were in the non-residential districts were just encompassed throughout. And also, we had special requirements in our corridors that were kind of streamlined as well into our standard requirements. Rather than having overlays and having to go to one book to the next, just created an overall requirement for landscaping. But in the industrial district, and especially in some of these small parking areas that are vacant, it really doesn't make sense when you think about the consistency between the two other existing buildings. So at least we would like to provide an alternative for someone to propose something, noting their surrounding area. So in essence, this memo pretty much proposes or notes what I just said. And I guess I'll just back up and say staff's recommendation is to amend the zoning district name for the light industrial zoning district to note it as the industrial district. Second amendment would be to add a heavy assembly manufacturing classification as previously allowed in the former zoning ordinance. And amendment 3 would be to amend section 3.06.08.d.2 non-residential development of the Unified Development Ordinance to add a non-residential development industrial regulation. Right now we have just non-residential. We need to get specific what we would allow in the industrial district, still classified as non-residential. And these specific exceptions would be that 200-foot right-of-way, public right-of-way masonry requirement, within which you could ask for alternative compliance. The same will be said for the landscaping. So the amendment number 4 would be to create a alternative compliance for the landscape requirements in non-residential. Right now, alternative compliance is kind of confusing in the UDO. At the end of the residential section, it says you can have alternative compliance from the landscape requirements, but it doesn't say that in the non-residential. So I'm pretty much creating or trying to create a alternative compliance section in the non-residential section and an alternative compliance section in the residential section. I guess if anyone has any questions, that's pretty much the gist of the proposed amendments.
Right before the UDO was adopted, I proposed that we add that heavy or industrial, because it was confusing the way it read, so I agree that something needs to be changed on that for sure. But I didn't know if it got changed or not before I did. Never went back and looked at the final revision to see if it did get put in, but apparently it didn't.
No.
I just have a couple of comments here. I did a little bit of research in the surrounding cities. We have 9 cities surrounding us that have a light industrial, and I know that some of this is being done for marketing purposes. I think that we should still keep the light industrial. I agree that we need to add a heavy industrial. I'd rather see heavy industrial than heavy assembly, personally, as a heavy. But for instance, Dallas, Rockwall, Plano, Arlington, Grand Prairie, Duncanville, Lancaster, DeSoto all have light industrial plus a heavy industrial designation. Rowlett and Frisco have only one designation like we do right now, and that's industrial, period. They don't separate out. Fort Worth actually has 3, light, medium, and heavy. So and my recommendation is that we keep the light industrial because it's kind of a common term for people going in and looking at these developments, but then we add the heavy industrial, or if everybody agrees, heavy assembly, whichever.
Heavy, you talk about the zoning district?
Yes, heavy, yeah, same zoning district. But I would think light industrial, heavy industrial would be better than heavy assembly.
That was discussed, and I kind of back up a little. I proposed multiple changes that could happen. Creating a new zoning district, heavy industrial, as well as light industrial. The issue is the timing that would take, as far as you have to create those conditional development standards. The zoning district, you would need to know the specific uses that you would want to allow on that. That's going to take some time for staff to draft up.
Well, are we not already doing that, separating what you're calling industrial to heavy industrial? I mean,
No.
are you separating any kind of...
All I'm doing is changing the name back to industrial and creating a new land use classification.
So we're not creating a zoning classification of heavy industrial, we're only creating a land use classification of heavy assembly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That makes a little more sense.
Okay.
Sometimes you can read these things 10 times and not see what the intent was.
No, I got you.
As far as the landscape materials and our alternative, we were discussing that. I believe that should have been done before the UDO was passed, but we knew there were going to have to be changes made later down the road. And the landscape, I feel the same way. I personally ran across this trying to develop one of these land in Mesquite. Every building around it was a metal building, and they wanted full 100% masonry, and had to walk away from it because it was too costly to build. So that's my comments here. Any other comments from them? Or questions for staff? We'll open this up as a public hearing then. If anybody wishes to approach and speak, please state your name and address.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Jonathan Benson, 2323 Ross Avenue, and I'm here tonight representing the Vince Hagen Company on this particular matter, actually this series of matters. Okay. First thing I want to do is I want to say how much we appreciate all the work that the town staff has obviously put into this on a very short time frame. We do appreciate that. We know this is a lot of detail to go through, as you can see, and so I just wanted to say that up front. Second thing I want to say is I want to reemphasize that the Vince Hagen Company has been in Sunnyvale since 1999, had invested very heavily in Sunnyvale. I think they've been a really good neighbor, and they want to continue to be a really good neighbor and want to work with the town in all respects. And in fact, you can see from the previous item, they're continuing to invest money into the property to try to make things even better for the employees and, adding to the ad valorem tax base and everything else that goes along with that. So we're here tonight in the spirit of cooperation and trying to help us all get to a good result that makes sense. I'll talk about the easier stuff first, which are the items about the facade materials and the landscaping. We appreciate the town staff looking for ways to add some flexibility into that makes some sense for the industrial area. So other than that, I don't have any substantive comment on those items. So I'll go ahead and get that out of the way first, even though that's not in numerical order. The more complicated issue that I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about is the zoning classification and then the uses that are allowed or not within that zoning classification. Industrial uses are, and you're right, every city around here has different types of classifications. They vary from city to city, whether they have more than one, and if so, what's permitted within those. In Dallas, for example, they have a group in their code of industrial classifications, and then they have, they classify the uses as to whether they might be incompatible or not, and then they have a laundry list of things that might be incompatible. So my point is that it's really hard to take, in the complex economy we have, all the different types of industrial operations that we have in this country, and to try to slot them into different use classifications, it's challenging for staff and it's challenging for owners. So we do appreciate and we support going back to labeling this the industrial classification. I totally get your point about looking at whether you divide it up into light industrial and heavy industrial. One challenge with that is you've got, I'm looking at the map, pretty big percentage of the town that's zoned, that purple color, which is right now light industrial. We're talking about going back to industrial. And if you start trying to divide that up between light industrial and heavy industrial, just as a zoning map exercise, it becomes very complicated. And then you're going to, people are going to start really coming in and saying, well, no, I'm light industrial. That could have some unintended consequences, I think. So I think from an ease of use and ease of reference standpoint, going back to just calling it industrial is something we would support. It helps us with our issue that we originally came forward with is, the perception of, are these uses, industrial uses, perceived to be non-conforming or maybe even become non-conforming because of that change in nomenclature. I think in most cities when people think of, light industrial, they may think of some different uses than maybe what some of these uses are that are present in Sunnyvale right now that are good corporate citizens and contribute to the tax base. When I was reading this and reading back in the old ordinance and the current UDO, I also noticed that there's a definition, a use definition for light assembly and manufacturing processes, and I couldn't find one for heavy assembly and manufacturing processes. And the staff has brought one forward to put it back in, because if you're going to divide things up between light and heavy, you kind of need to have definitions for both. Speaking only for the Vince Hagen Company, I've driven the site a couple of times. Obviously, the executive staff is here. I've talked to them about the operation. What they do there in particular, and I just want to address that as an illustration of trying to slot things into different use definitions. It's heavy equipment. It's manufactured for use for concrete batching. But what they do is they have this big building, and they have these metal pieces of equipment that they weld together within the building. My point there is that it's not processing anything. It's not like you think of a steel mill that makes steel, and you think of an oil refinery that makes petrochemicals. That to me is really heavy industry that actually processes raw materials or things close to raw materials. And historically, in every city have been maybe more problematic than just assembly operations that take place within a building, which is what we do. My point there is that, looking at both of these definitions, I've had a lot of experience trying to talk to people about what's your business model, and then take that and translate it into a use definition in a zoning ordinance and figure out how would city staff likely classify this use. And sometimes it's real easy, and sometimes it's really challenging, to figure that out. And I'm just looking at the light assembly. It talks about assembly manufacturing predominantly from previously prepared materials, but excluding basic industrial processing. I would make the case that what Vince Hagen Company does is actually light assembly and manufacturing processes, because they're not processing these raw materials. And then you look down at heavy assembly, generally includes the more intensive processing and manufacture of raw materials, et cetera, like my examples. So, there's the challenge of trying to figure out which is which. And I do have a point by giving you that exposition, and what I think we would like to propose, and I just had this idea this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to talk to the staff about it, is there obviously was a use definition in the revised UDO for the concrete batching equipment manufacturing. What we would like to propose, just for the sake of clarity, to make sure we don't end up again in a non-conforming or allegedly non-conforming situation, have to come back and do a CUP or an SUP or whatever it might be, is to add that as an additional use classification with the definition that goes along with that. Allow it in the industrial classification by right. Because right now, the way this is proposed, the heavy manufacturing would require an SUP. The light manufacturing would not. We think we're light manufacturing and assembly, but for the sake of clarity and just to safeguard, their investment going forward and eliminate any potential issue of nonconformity, again, I'd like to propose that we add back in the concrete batching equipment manufacturing as a separate use classification with the definition that goes along with that, permitted by right in what will be renamed back to the industrial zoning classification. You have lots of other safeguards, the landscaping requirements, facade materials requirements, all your other code requirements. We think we've been good neighbors. We strive to be good neighbors, with the landscaping and things like that. So as long as these operations take place within the building, which they do, then I don't think it's a problem or an issue for the surrounding property owners. And of course, we're in an industrial area anyway. The question was raised, well, what happens 30 years from now? Maybe Vince Hagen Company, moves somewhere. I hope not, but if they do, you never know. Things might happen. If they were to do that and another industrial type user showed up, at that time, staff again would make the call. What are you doing here? Are you processing raw materials? Are you just assembling? How do we classify this? And on that basis, that user and the town didn't know from a zoning standpoint, is it permitted by right, or do they have to come in for a CUP or SUP? So I would just like to offer that up as a proposal, which I think it certainly addresses our issue, resolves any potential nonconformity now or in the future. But other than that, again, totally appreciate very much what town staff has done. I appreciate y'all's time on this. We love being in Sunnyvale. It's a great community. Excited to be here, invested, and will continue to invest in the future.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions.
All right. I have a question for Rashad. Before in your telling us about these changes, you mentioned that we had already changed some land use designations separately. Is this one of the ones?
The land use classifications were added. And we took heavy manufacturing out. We added the concrete batch manufacturing, and we added tile manufacturing to assure that our existing quote-unquote heavy manufacturing uses would continue. Now, I will note this amendment won't take those out. I'm just adding a heavy manufacturing classification.
So, and they would fall within that classification.
They would fall in, as they exist, as a concrete batch manufacturing, concrete batch equipment manufacturing classification. Now,
I'm a little confused on that. We're basically creating a land use category for one company.
That was what was done.
Yeah, that exists now. I guess our follow-up question, and I'm sorry if I'm out of order, is would we be, in that scenario, continuing with that use classification permitted by right, or would we have to come back and get a special permit of some kind?
You can continue right now, existing, but as it stands, that classification requires a specific use designation.
Right. I guess my only point would be to offer for your consideration the idea of permitting it by right. So we wouldn't have to deal with that potential nonconformity issue.
That's something I would have to do at a later date. Know that amendment's not on the agenda tonight.
And we'd have to give a notice for that as well.
Right.
It's not something we can change on the fly.
No.
Well, I mean, I think you are considering the use charts tonight, so, but that's,
I mean, I'm not opposed to it since we're adding heavy. The issue is we would have to determine either through the classifications that the use is noted under. I guess my question would be, when Ms. Hagan came in under the site plan, what were you classified under?
Heavy industrial.
Okay. That's, I mean, we had to do a reorganization of classification, you know.
Right.
It's a little convoluted there to get them at light industrial. Or we could, like I said, amend the concrete batch
yeah.
manufacturing classification to allow by right.
Yeah, I just, mainly for the sake of clarity and
Right.
I'm all about trying to eliminate, gray areas and nonconformity issues, so, thank you.
Well, that brings up our land use chart here, industrial heavy, or industrial manufacturing heavy. Under light, it would be allowed by right. Under heavy with this SUP, correct?
Which
So you're looking at, oh, that's the formula, I'm sorry. Now, let me back up here, let me get to the right chart. Do we even have a proposed land use chart here?
I have the existing land use chart in the packet as an excerpt from the UDO showing the comparison between it and the old land use chart. And then I have the amendment itself, just showing that we're adding heavy manufacturing classification.
You don't have a proposed land use chart?
This is where I'm getting a little confused.
Let me,
Or is it just as simple as we just look at it as it outlines?
Exactly. This is current practice. You said it in
So,
Exhibit 1.
So my question is, you went from a general designation of industrial or manufacturing heavy to very specific businesses. We've got two listed by name. One that concrete batching equipment, and the other one tile manufacturing.
that was what was done with the UDO.
Right. So what would happen now is those would slide over into this heavy assembly and manufacturing process, correct?
They would
Under industrial.
still be their own land use classification.
Since they're already existing.
They're already
in the
existing.
UDO.
Are they the only two large businesses like that needed to be designated?
I think that was the intent for that, to designate those specific uses. The issue is when those uses no longer exist and you have buildings developed for heavy manufacturing uses and you don't have a heavy manufacturing classification.
So if either one of these businesses were to go out and someone else is coming in with a different style of business?
Right. We don't have a heavy manufacturing classification for that. Now, if it's a light manufacturing use, they're fine. But heavy manufacturing uses, they're not. We don't have a means other than concrete batch, those specific uses or tile manufacturing. Now, I will say those buildings are pretty specific in for tile manufacturing, but let's say somebody really wants to go in and retrofit the building to have a different use. We won't have a means to classify them. They can come in at that time though and ask for an amendment to the land use chart, but we're just trying to get ahead of that.
So anything that says LIBI
Yes.
with concrete batching as permitted by right?
No.
No.
Not the way we have it.
That's not what's on the agenda, that was oral proposal.
Yes.
That we can't entertain right now?
No.
Okay.
See, I still think that we need to split this thing up, and I know it's difficult and it can't be done right now. I know there's specific reasons why we're trying to do this. I just think we're gonna be revisiting this thing again,
I think
and very soon.
it's been zoned like this for 30 years and we haven't had any problems, but at the same time, I get what you're saying, but I presented this to council and they felt this was the best approach for time's sake. Now down the line, if we want to look at different zoning districts,
Dividing it out.
we can do that.
We'd have to do that and give notice anyhow, so
Right.
nothing we can do about that. And we cannot really change the by right now, because we don't, that would have to be noticed as well for everyone. So I guess that what you're proposing right now is the way to go.
I don't know, but
You don't know?
where in there does it define industrial in the proposal? That's what I've been looking for.
That is the heavy manufacturing, that is, let's see if we can find, it's in the packet.
Exhibit 1.
Can you find this page?
That's the amendment that describes the heavy manufacturing.
It's under tab 6, the last page.
Last page.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I did want to add one more thing. I apologize. The owner of the property, Vince Hagan Company, wanted me to make sure and emphasize that to the extent, from their perspective, from a business operations perspective, long-term, you know, any kind of nonconformity or perception of nonconformity is very problematic for them in terms of getting financing and, you know, interest in potential purchasers at some distant point in the future, things like that. So they just wanted to make sure that, and I know y'all understand that, they just wanted me to make sure to emphasize that point for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Because you can't really put heavy assembly by right under light industrial. Is where I'm having a problem. It's still heavy.
We're changing the zoning district name though, to
Right.
industrial.
Right.
So we'll have an industrial zoning district with a light assembly and manufacturing use and a heavy assembly and manufacturing use. Similar to the way it was.
And then will we eventually list out heavy assembly uses underneath that category like we do everything else?
It'll be our responsibility to look at this definition and know whether or not the proposed use falls under that definition, or heavy or light.
I have a question. Does this change anything for the homeowners that are in the area surrounding these businesses? Whether it's classified, nothing?
Not at this time. That was also presented to council as conditional development standards for the industrial district. At this time, we're going to bring that back. So,
Like screening, anything different between those designations, or just a name change for right now?
right. I haven't, I know there's some details in our ordinance right now that require certain things be done when industrial abuts residential, but we haven't delved into that change yet. There can be some additional conditional standards for development within a certain proximity of residential zone, and that's what I'm going to come back to.
And shouldn't we be entertaining that as a package now rather than passing that? Without undefined standards, if it's, to Ms. Daniels' points, if it's so close to residential neighborhood.
We already have some of that in the UDO, and what we're talking about is maybe changing that at a later date, upping the requirements or making sure the requirements are good.
Well, let me understand this, maybe I'm missing something here. So if you look on the map that Director Jackson has, like for example, you look at Clay Road in Bandera, where it's in that LI purple zone, that would be changed to what then as a
Industrial.
industrial, and which would encompass what?
The same uses as before, but we're just adding heavy manufacturing back into that classification, that zoning district.
So it wouldn't be the same uses, it would be an expanded.
It would be the same uses that were there previously in the
Plus more.
The same uses that were in there previously in the zoning ordinance.
Somehow between the zoning ordinance and the new UDO,
Right.
we dropped the heavy.
So, yeah.
So,
But I don't think that's the answer to the question, though, because right now, LI has restricted uses, right? So there's certain things that can't be, that aren't included. But when we add in heavy assembly, that will be LI plus additional uses. Correct? It would be the LI definition plus additional uses pursuant to how it's codified right now in the UDO.
Right. We'll be adding a heavy manufacturing classification.
Right, and so my concern is that with respect to the question that Daniel asked about the residences near that area, we're adding more industrial uses if this is passed, because the UDO right now is more restricted based on the definition of light industrial as codified in the UDO.
Understood that, yes.
Right, okay.
I will note staff and the council looked this over and considered all those issues and felt this was the best approach to get us back so we can move forward and be able to administer this appropriately as far as development is concerned. They are aware of those proximity concerns and they've asked staff to move forward with development amendments, but we couldn't do that within the time period that these property owners and developers needed. So that's why we're moving forward with these changes to get back to where we were.
Right, and the issue is, I think Commissioner Demko mentioned it, the issue is an issue of marketing.
Well, that was one of the concerns, but also just development as well. I mean, Fitzhagen is expanding, and many of these regulations prohibit them from expanding the way they used to be able to. The existing industrial park is all concrete. If someone comes in there and tries to meet our landscaping requirements, there's no way they're going to meet that requirement. The brick for an internal landscaping development, internal industrial development, and you're requiring the entire building to be brick around metal buildings, it really
doesn't make sense.
See, I'm sympathetic to that issue, but at the same rate too, when it's close to residences, which in the Fitzhagen situation is not, but the way it would be on the map, it's adding more industrial uses.
Actually, what we're doing is we're tightening it up, is we're going from 300-foot setback to 200-foot setback. Any building within 200 feet would have to meet the masonry and the landscape requirements, the way I'm understanding this.
But aren't we permitting the fabrication, assembly, manufacturing, packaging, heavy manufacturing products or parts too, which previously aren't allowed?
No. We don't have any right now. In the UDO, we have nothing as far as heavy assembly. And I can understand that the clients or the owners of the property, I mean, they've had that privilege for years, and all of a sudden we make a change and it kind of gets dropped through the cracks.
No, and I get that. What I'm saying is that...
But we're not really adding anything, we're just going back to what it was.
But it's still so close to the residences, these uses would be permitted, whereas right now they're not.
It's still an SUP.
It would all still be an SUP.
It is according to this right now. They're asking for it not to be, but I can't see with a change of use, not having it as an SUP. or just use it a land use. Now, if it was a separate zoning district, then we could put all sorts of criteria on it, but that's where we can't.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be the squeaky wheel, Director Jackson, but to the extent that you mentioned a designation when you're close to residential neighborhoods, is there a way by which there could be some sort of distinction or designation so that we could accomplish the goals of our businesses here in Sunnyvale, which we want to help, but also assuage and protect the residents that are nearby? Could the staff go back and make those designations to appease all sides?
Yes, and that's the plan. Rather than a designation, there will be conditional development standards that I'm looking to add for any development within a certain area that's within a certain proximity to residential development.
And so theoretically, we could actually obtain that definition and build it into that which we were talking about tonight.
Not without any development standards to tie to it. I wouldn't want to designate anything without knowing.
No, I'm not talking about tonight, but I'm saying that we could take that work and put it into that which we're proposing and discussing now to get a more comprehensive view of it, right? So that we're protecting residents and also our businesses here in the town.
Not completely understanding
The work you're referring to, going back and making those distinctions and definitions for neighborhoods.
Yes.
And so that could be, at a later date, that could be worked into what we're talking about here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
Sir, did you have some comments or was it covered?
No, I think the discussion cleared things up.
So we really can't make any changes on what we're, use rights. We have to keep it as an SUP here. I understand the difference in the land use, and I understand why we have to do this. I think we should proceed with it as the staff has recommended. Any other questions or comments?
I'm David Jackson, and I'm the real estate broker in Sunnyvale Center, but I'm also an owner, a developer. And so I appreciate your experience with developing in a city that required things that were too onerous to make a development work. I'm also the president of the Property Owner Association, so I have all these people calling me and who got real upset that their property values could have been diminished if this is all just zoned light industrial and they can't sell their building, but for 60% of what it's worth because you can't do heavy manufacturing anymore. And I am sympathetic to the proximal to the residences, and I heard the town council say, let's get this changed over first, and then we'll deal with the proximity to the residence deal, because I have people that are trying to build buildings. I've got 2 or 3 different people that are trying to do things out there, and they're the Printex, they're put the brakes on everything. They're bankers saying, without the proper zoning, we can't finance this deal. So they got plenty upset, and reasonably so, and the town council understood and said, oops, we made a mistake, let's revert it back, and then let's go fine-tune the proximity to the residence type things. So I appreciate all y'all's heavy lifting on this. I've got a bunch of users that are, feel like, boy, we're paying a big chunk of the taxes in that town, and they treat us like this. They really felt a little disrespected. They weren't even notified of a zoning change personally, and so that, they'll get over that. But and I'm good with just one zoning classification. If you want to go and split out light zoning or proximity to residences, that's fine. I've been a real estate broker for 37 years, working all over the Metroplex, and I've seen towns that had I-1, I-2, I-3, or the different zoning classifications. It's all over the board how they do it. And understand, most of my comments are directed towards Sunnyvale Center, which is that 77-acre park just to the east of Marazzi Tile. But obviously they were trying to take care of Marazzi Tile in that code and trying to take care of Vince Hagen. They forgot about the other people in the park to list their use as a protected use. And so that's why we've got to go back and put in a heavy manufacturing type use. I recognize there are certain uses the city does not want to have, and that was part of the impetus for this thing being switched to light industrial. They forgot about all these, people that were paying pretty big tax dollars. But, and I've had a couple conversations with Rashad about things that I would like to see, and we probably can't handle these tonight, but I wanted to bring them up tonight because Rashad said it would be the best way to do it. I would like to see if there's a way we could have zoning by right if they meet certain standards, and maybe later they can. We've discussed that, but he did say it's not a special use permit that has an expiration date. It's a special use designation that would flow with the land. So we've got to get comfortable with that. But I have a lot of people saying, I don't want to be under a special use permit. What happens when I try to sell, when I sell my business and the buyer moves it to Houston and I got to sell my building now, am I going to be restricted on being able to sell that building? And under the old light industrial classification, Moranci Tile would be one big hummer of a vacant building if they weren't allowed to do some sort of heavy manufacturing in there. But so if there's a way we can have areas, whether it's the heavy industrial classification area and a light industrial, we'll work with that later. But if there's a way we could get away without not having that special use designation, that would be helpful. I've had comments about we'd like to see a better definition of what can be done within, outside of that 200-foot barrier, and he's addressed some of those things. We can build metal buildings, and the landscaping requirements we've backed off some, but I just want to understand that piece a little more clearly, because frankly, these manufacturers, they don't want to spend a lot of money on landscaping and then just have it die when you say you can't water it, and it doesn't do much for their bottom line. But one of the things that Rashad and I have discussed is the ability with restrictions of being able to do part of these sites in a permeable surface. Right now, the only acceptable surface in Sunnyvale is concrete. And you talked about, the economic viability of a deal. Concrete for trucking companies, that's 7 inches thick or better, is $300,000 an acre. I have a guy who's looking at the 10.9 acres in the north end of the park to do tractor trailer, trucking, trucker type storage, when that over the road truck driver from Mesquite is in town, he has a place to park his truck when he's in town, and then leave his pickup there when he goes on the road. I've got a guy who'd like to create a truck trailer type storage yard. Well, you put that whole thing in concrete and you're at $5 and $6 million for that project. And so if we could look at the possibility, working with the town engineer, of doing a permeable surface, meaning, and I recognize caliche can create dust, it kind of, diminishes into the, gumbo soil we have and stuff, but if we could create some standards for doing that with dust-free type rock or crushed granite or something like that, maybe even putting a mesh down before you put it down, and creating it in a fashion to where it will not look bad. And obviously it's away from the streets, so you can't see it. This isn't quite like rail trucking's deal there on Long Creek where you can see that whole thing. But if we can do that, there are some businesses that, I had a broker call the other day on a couple acre site, which would have been the one that I'm a part owner in, and he was saying, I've got an underground utility contractor and they need to be able to store equipment and some materials, but they want to do it on a rock type field. And I understand with Rashad, the car parks would be concrete, the driveways would be concrete, but if it were, the back of the property and not visible to the majority of people, then that is so much better a surface. You can do it for, a nicer one that would meet y'all's standards, probably 40 grand an acre instead of 300,000 an acre for the surface. And the better thing is it allows the water to flow through some so that you're not dealing with changing all the floodplain and everything else when you put a whole lot of concrete down. But anyway, wanted the ability to, work with the town staff to, look at developing a standard and allowing that in certain cases. Maybe there we have a special use designation. I'd also have had talks with Rashad and several of his predecessors. I've been working in Sunnyvale Center for probably 14 years. That there was no truck, trailer, RV, bus type storage in heavy industrial district. It was allowed in freeway commercial, but how beautiful is that? And so I'd like to see it allowed there because that would allow this use that this guy is looking at to be able to happen. We're better to stack these trailers and tractor trailers and things like that than back in a heavy industrial type site. Or, we're not calling it heavy industrial, but that industrial park that's away from the street. So I'd like to see that use being moved over there. Rashad said the big thing the town doesn't want is you to put in a truck stop, like like you see down the highway, selling fuel, all this truck traffic and everything. And this guy is talking about putting in a little bit of a truck shop, but for the users there, not primarily. And then some of these would be storage uses for like Rail Trucking's doing on Long Creek. He's storing a bunch of trailers for Marazzi Tile, and he just has them all lined up there. That's what this guy's looking at doing. So, I'd like to see some of these kind of things built into this code revision. I think the city council's directive to Rashad was, let's get it switched back so these people can feel comfortable getting loans and moving forward with their projects, and then we'll fine tune the residential proximities and some of the other things afterwards. So that is what I had to share, and I do have a lot of people who are still very uncomfortable and very concerned, and so I'm hoping we can give them some relief that their use is legal and allowed, and they'll be able to sell their building to somebody who looks and smells like them when they end up leaving.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the? All right. Anyone else? Please go.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm Carolyn Wester from Printex. We reside in the industrial park, and probably I'm the voice of what a lot of people may be thinking, but being very polite and tenuous about saying point blank in terms of being a longtime property owner and a longtime taxpayer. I find it somewhat appalling that we were not notified of the change to begin with. We don't need to run by why or how that happened, but hopefully there's some kind of understanding or some kind of something y'all can point me to find out if that is a continuous process. Because no matter what I do with my property going forward, I have to stop and think, what's the city council going to do? Or I have to monitor the city council to see who's thinking about doing what, if it comes up in the time frame that I can watch it. So all of that has kind of undermined my faith that I'm not in y'all's business and y'all are not in my business. But I understand all of it was an unintended consequence in terms of whatever happened to what we consider our particular property or the industrial park. I still hope, and unfortunately did not hear all the answers to where are y'all today, but it sounds like y'all are much closer to potentially sort of putting us back where we were, and the new undeveloped property or underdeveloped property can have rules of its own that don't necessarily have to include us. But again, I'm going to leave that to y'all to ferret out. I don't know anyone here, don't have any interest, don't have any dog fight in anything that's going on with the city. I have driven around the city, and y'all have an absolutely beautiful little town. I understand why they don't want heavy industrial going into the wrong places and really destroying some of this gorgeous landscape and these houses you have. But I also have to bring up the point that the businesses helped all along in history to be able to get where you are with that. The taxpayers in those homes may be paying taxes. We're paying taxes. The new businesses that come in may or may not be paying taxes, depending on what you had to do to incent them to come in. But what I've seen more than anything else happen in these type of developments, particularly in Dallas and Plano, is the developers buy up an awful lot of the property. So then you have to start bowing to the developers, because developers don't pay taxes. They promise you incoming people who are going to pay taxes. But I put money on the fact that CVS, the new CVS that came to town, is probably not currently in a tax-paying position, because we've seen that happen in Dallas. Our property next to us was sold to CVS, and they're not paying taxes. And as long as they don't pay taxes, my property's not going to be paying taxes either, because there is no reason for it to be unequal to the basis of you want to bring in new business, but you want the old business to carry the burden. And if the businesses don't carry the burden because you chase them out of town, i.e. whether it be heavy business or medium business, then those homeowners that you have will be carrying the burden. And they don't know that yet, and only because I'm as old as I am do I know that, because I've seen the cycle go through. So hopefully y'all are aiming at a balancing act of business being there to sustain when you don't want to raise it on the residential, and the residential being able to sustain when the business gets difficult, which economic times will roll up and down. So if you have a nice balance, that works. But heavy industry is part of that, and we fall in that category of heavy industry. We're back in that corner in the industrial park. It itself is in a corner of your community that is not highly visible. So for me, the stewards of that park do all the heavy lifting to make sure that that park remains a non-eyesore, doesn't have smelly plants in it, doesn't allow people who would not be good for their business and their continuing sales. So I suspect if you can tweak some of the things that they want for that park, y'all won't have to worry about anything going on in that park, because they monitor the first step, and that makes it easier on y'all. But having said that, the primary thing I want to make sure that there is at least a way for me to understand, as a property owner, what do I need to do to make sure that I know what's happening on the city council that may impact my property suddenly and very impactfully. Now, as I walked in the door, I heard him say that we put the brakes on everything we were going to do, and that's a fact. At this point, I have plans for renters for my property in Dallas, where we have some property just outside downtown Dallas. That is the new Dubai of Dallas. We stopped manufacturing there when we came here. We have to move those people. I will not be moving them into this building, because I cannot comfortably right now build the building that we've already got a permit for, because we put in permits before the water main lines were an issue in that park. Because to me, you've undermined the building itself in terms of its value. And the banker, if I have to give them today's value, is not going to want to fund, because they always want an equity position. I'm surprised Haggett and Marazi Tile are not in here saying, hey, you just undermined my business value because of my building, and we won't lower taxes. I'm not sure when the tax bills due, but if you just took away half the value of my property because my property is geared for heavy industry, why do I not get a tax break for that? So if in fact that's true, other than you going to raise the rates to make up the difference, then where are you going to make up that tax base if in fact you've impacted everybody's property value? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
So again, I came in from a long trip yesterday, so I'm tired. I'm overly blunt, I'm sure. I appreciate everybody's effort and what you're trying to accomplish as a city, and we will do everything we can to help you do that. But we just don't want to be disturbed and have to think twice about, we have two mothers. One is the park itself, and then the other has suddenly become the city. And I can't watch two mothers. One's enough. So, do y'all have any questions about where we're coming from on any of that?
No, ma'am. Anybody?
Is there a place where I haven't looked to understand why the property owners were not notified?
Ma'am, all I can tell you is that when we worked on the UDO for 2.5 years, and that there were notices given or every meeting that we had, legal notices. I don't know why a particular property owner wouldn't have been notified for any of those meetings. And we've had a lot of businesses come in and discuss things in each and every one of those meetings.
Okay.
And this is, again, no one's perfect in this world.
Nope.
And we, of course, the UDO was just a combination of 3 different volumes of, so that we get it all in one book instead of having 3 different zoning ordinance, development ordinance, so forth, so forth. So there were some things that just like this that might have got misplaced. Well, unfortunately, the good thing about it, the UDO allows us to go back and make these changes, whereas before we'd have to maybe make changes in 3 different locations. So now we've got one binding ordinance, the UDO, and we can make these changes, and we make them on the fly, and we can make them quicker than we could before.
Right.
So I don't know why you weren't noticed, or if you were noticed, but we did everything by the law, and it took 2.5 years to do that.
Right. Well, I am certainly guilty of being from Dallas, where not only do they put up signs on the properties, they serve you written notice, and you have to sort of respond back that you received that written notice. So they've probably got a lot more years of experience of people like me going, what?
Had there been a zoning change,
I'm
I
sorry.
would agree that would have had to happen, but I don't think there was ever any intent of making a zoning change. Am I not correct?
You're correct.
So this is just nomenclature in our new UDO. It needs to be corrected, and that's what we're trying to do here this evening.
Okay. Let me know if I can help with anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate it. Again, sorry for my attitude at the moment, but
You were great, no problem.
it's more tired than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would note, if you'd like to be notified, they are, our town secretary can put you on the list for any public notices that are sent out as far as agendas, town council. She can put you on a list, email list to receive that information.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good evening, Tracy Anderson, 2740 McCormick Court. As you know, I'm the Economic Development Director for the town of Sunnyvale, and just wanted to make a couple of comments to kind of address some of the issues that have been talked about. I've been working with Rashad and some of the employers about the zoning change and going back to how it was before because of the expansion plans with Printex and Vince Hagen, and making it comfortable for them to be able to expand and further bring a tax base here to Sunnyvale. One, not only for property taxes, but sales tax for some of them, and as well as more employees to have a daytime population that we can use to be able to attract more retailers. With that, I've also been, next week, I'm holding a CEO primary industry roundtable that everybody's been invited to as far as the primary employers go, so that they can talk about some of the issues and we can keep informed of what's going on with them, as well as telling them what's going on with the town, so we have that communication back and forth. We're also trying to expand a business retention side of our economic development organization so that we can better reach out to the primary employers and take care of the businesses that we have here. So at the first quarter of next year, we're going to hold a big business retention event for the primary industries and kind of give tenure awards and stuff out so that they know that we appreciate them for being in Sunnyvale. So just wanted to kind of give y'all some ideas of kind of what we're doing to try and make the businesses that we have know that we do appreciate them. We want them here. We want to expand here. And that, you know, we're all on the same page on trying to change it back to it was just an oversight. It wasn't anything that was intended to be done in this instance. So anyway, thank y'all.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I ask a question of one of the prior
Sure.
speakers, the gentleman in the purple shirt? I'm sorry, I neglected to get your name.
Excuse me, this is maroon.
I have a beautiful maroon shirt. Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's fighting Texas Aggies, we were.
That's right. And I apologize for calling you back up, and I apologize again for not asking this question when you were up here. But you had advocated for passage of the amendments this evening, and then to deal with the residential issues later on.
Well, no, that's not me advocating for that. That was the town council instructed Rashad, let's get this, set back, and then let's deal with, specifically, they said, let's deal with the residential proximity issues, because I know that they're really concerned about, what's that street over there on the side?
Larkin Road.
Larkin Road. They're real concerned about those houses, because that's what caused this to begin with.
Well,
you know.
so my question to you really was, and it's not a loaded question, I promise, it's just I wanted to know, what's the harm that the folks that you represent would incur or endure if we were to tonight direct the staff to address those residential issues hastily so that we can accomplish all that some of the many fine speakers have spoken about today, support our business community, but also support our residential neighbors as well. What would be the harm?
The biggest harm, and the reason the staff directed Rashad to do it in 2 steps, is to give, specifically for Prentex, because Prentex is in the mode of, talking to a banker about financing an addition to their building so she can move the rest of her employees over here that are currently still in Dallas. She operated out of 2 locations. Vince Hagen used to be in 2 locations, one in Dallas, one here. She shut the other one down, moved everything here. Vince Hagen is moving forward with her project. She's doing the office building for sure. The lunchroom building was contingent upon, are we going to be able to back this off to where I can build a metal building and not have fancy masonry and a lot of landscaping, and they're doing that. So the reason for doing this kind of in 2 steps was so that these people who are in motion with projects can move forward with those projects. And then obviously for Sunnyvale Center, the residential adjacency thing doesn't apply to us. And so selfishly speaking, I represent 25 acres in there, 15 of which I'm a minority owner in with John Rogers, wherever he went. He's the majority owner. And then 10.9 that's owned by the guy who owns Acura Systems. So I'm just a broker on that. I'm a broker investor on the others. So,
but if we direct the town staff to address the residential issue and bring it back on the agenda next time we meet, are we harming anybody in the business community by bringing it up at the next meeting? Is there imminent harm in that regard?
The only harm that I see is that the delay. I think the town and probably Rashad feel like this isn't something you're going to do in just a week. It's a little more complex to either do residential adjacency or calling the stuff within so many feet of residences light industrial. And I understand this Larkin Road is probably the key one, and the stuff maybe along Long Creek there, that's on the other side of the water plant there, is also part of that target. My owners in Sunnyvale Center, which, forgive me for only thinking about that, and Marazzi Tile, which is the big giant elephant, they do not have residential proximities. They want to operate their businesses and make improvements now, and this could, doing the detail work on those fine tunings may take, 2 or 3 or so meetings, which means a couple months worth of time. I mean, Rashad did a lot of heavy lifting to you can see in the packet there, just to get it to this level. And it's going to probably take about that much more, or half that much more to, the big giant question in your mind is protecting the residences.
Well, but the big giant question in my mind is getting that balance, because I want to do everything that many of the speakers have said, but also protect the residents. So I want to do both.
I agree.
I'm asking you, how can you help me? How can we figure that out?
And, I guess the real question is, these people are in motion, so to speak. And, Ms. Wester's basically put the brakes on her project until she gets real comfortable that this is going to be safe for her to move forward. I don't know if there's any projects that are proposed or or pending or in the works for these residential proximity pieces of land?
Not that I'm completely aware of as far as submitted and met with anybody.
I mean, he would know. He's your leading edge of what's happening in town. And though that might happen in 2 weeks, it may take 2.5 months to get that fully fleshed out. And some of these other little refinements that I'd like to see, because I'm the one who's trying to sell stuff to bring new companies in. That 25 acres that I have available for sale, it's on the tax rolls for maybe $1 million, $2 million, $5 million total as land value. It'll be worth 20 to 25 million when it's totally developed. That's a lot of tax dollars paying for schools. So, but I've had several people that, like I say, that one underground utility contractor, that broker said, if they're in flux on their zoning, call me when they're done. He didn't even want to show it to his client when it was in flux. And obviously, for him to be a candidate, I need to get that permeable surface as a possibility. I'm willing to take another couple months to get some of those refinements, but there are things that will allow me to sell those properties to the type of users that will go inside that park. Inside that park, it's good for manufacturers, service companies, and maybe distribution, but not really. So that's all I've got is candidates for it. But I do recognize your issue, but I really think you're only, a month and a half or 2 months away from getting that anyway. What the town council wanted to do was, frankly, give Carol Hagan and Ms. Wester a comfort level to move forward with projects that were imminent.
I appreciate that, and you're right. It wasn't a rude shirt.
Thank you. I got to be right about something. Thanks.
I just kind of wanted to address your question. As far as the part that butts up to the residential, there's about 200 acres that's around there right now. And I talk all the time with the broker on the 113 acres known as the Vulcan property, and they currently don't have anybody that is set in stone looking at that. So for that process where the residents are, there's plenty of time to be able to go through that process as opposed to where the industrial park is and Marazzi and all of that to get them going. So I think some of the concerns with that property being sold or anything like that is not in the near future. If that helps answer any of that as far as what's butting up against the residential portion of it.
Thank you. Anyone else? And we'll now close the public portion of this agenda item. All right, anyone? I think pretty much I've stated it one time before, and I think after hearing everybody, we have to go back to the industrial zoning and add the land use of the heavy manufacturing. And that should put us all pretty back to where we were, and then we'll proceed from here as to having to do anything else about by right or that type of thing at a later date, or the residential proximity. Anyone else? Then I'll entertain a motion for items 6, 7, 8, or 5, 6, 7, 8. And I won't make you have to read all that again.
I propose that we approve these requested amendments as written.
That's the same. Second. Have a first and second. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. All right, on to agenda item number 9. Thank you, everybody. Applicant, again, is the town of Sunnyvale. The request is to amend sign regulations for non-residential flagpoles. This is an ordinance amending the town unified development ordinance, 1709, duly passed by the town council on March 26, 2018. It's amended from time to time so as to review and amend section 3.06.01B, sign types and regulations, specifically section 3.06.01B.16 flag, as well as any other associated sections. Director Jackson.
Chairman of the Commission, direction was provided to town staff to provide an amendment to the UDO. It was noted that there was an inconsistency between regulation for flags in the residential zoning district as compared to in our non-residential section, non-residential zone district. Right now, in the residential, you can have a flag of up to 25 feet tall. The non-residential says 20 feet. The proposed amendment just is going to make it consistent. Both will be noted as 25 feet.
All right, we have to open a public hearing on this. Anyone want to address? Apparently not, so we'll close the public hearing. How about any questions, comments from staff? If not, I entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
It's been first and second, all those in favor? All right, we'll now close this planning and zoning at 8:34. Thank you, everyone.
Blacked out halfway through.